everyone. My name is Francesca Modini and I'm a Leventis Early Career Fellow at the University of Warwick. At Warwick, my research aims to map the function of music in Greek communities under Rome, but I'm generally interested in the cultural and political role of musical practices in antiquity. Accordingly, in today's talk, I'm going to discuss how a musical perspective can throw new light on Roman imperial power. First of all, a bit of context. Where does this idea of linking music and emperors come from? Do we have evidence of the political significance of music in Rome? In fact, we do, and some quite compelling evidence at that. First of all, and more in general, we need to recall that music was an ever-present part of ancient life, so that it is all the more natural that Roman emperors may want to tap into such a powerful, influential medium. As suggested by Timothy Power, however, we can also point precisely to two emperors who used music and musical imagery for political purposes. I'm talking about Augustus, the founder of the empire, and Nero, one of the most infamous Roman rulers. As we are going to see, music was central to the politics of both Augustus and Nero, but the ways in which they used musical elements and the reception they received were, just like their figures, very different. It is by focusing on their musical politics that we can better understand the way Augustus and Nero represented and used their imperial power. A first glimpse of the link between Augustus and music is provided by a classic of the Augustan period, Virgil's Aeneid. As recently demonstrated by Lauren Curtis, there are in particular two moments in the epic where music plays a substantial role in the presentation of the emperor. When in Book 4, Aeneas arrives to join Queen Dido on a hunting trip, Virgil tells us that Aeneas was like Apollo leaving his winter home in Lycia to visit his mother at Delos, there to start the dancing again, while all around the altars gather noisy throngs of Cretans and Dryopes and painted Agathersian. Among other functions, Apollo was the god of music, a role that Virgil foregrounds in this passage through the image of Apollo leading a noisy dance. So Aeneas is compared to Apollo in his musical capacity. But since in the poem Aeneas functions as the avatar of Augustus, then his musical representation may also reflect forward onto Augustus. But what is political in comparing Augustus and Apollo as musical deity? This is suggested by a crucial passage of the poem. I'm referring to the description of Aeneas' shield in Book 8, in particular its central section occupied by the Battle of Actium. Here, Apollo is once again a fundamental presence, and with him is music. Besides overseeing the battlefield and inspiring terror in Octavian's enemies, Apollo is finally present at Octavian's triumph in Rome, where the soon-to-be emperor celebrates his victory at Apollo's temple on the Palatine, while the streets resounded with joy and festivities and applause, and a chorus of patrons sang at every temple. Octavian's victory is presented as bringing order to the whole world, and music as the important function of enhancing the sense of an orderly, harmonious cosmos. Despite the importance of Virgil's poem, however, we also have evidence that this musical element was not just the result of Virgil's own representation of the Augustan regime. Instead, music was an integral part of Augustus' propaganda about his new golden era. For example, the Temple of Apollo, where Octavian celebrates his triumph in Virgil, was dedicated on the Palatine 3 years after Actium and features a statue of Apollo playing the kithara, a professional concert lyre. Thus, the nexus Apollo music marked the establishment of Augustus' rule also in material culture. People could see the statue of Apollo as a musician in the temple that Octavian dedicated to celebrate Actium. What is more, Suetonius tells us that it was under the pedestal of the musical statue of Apollo that Augustus decided to store the Sibylline oracles, prophetic text on the past and future of Rome, as if to say that Rome's destiny, now at its peak with Augustus, was linked to and protected by the god of music. Last but not least, as regards Augustus and music, we need to recall that in 17 BCE, the emperor commissioned from Horace a centennial hymn, which was sung by 2 choruses of boys and girls during the celebrations for the new Augustan century. In the hymn itself, music, in the form of singing, is said to mark the orderly and peaceful repetition of time, with the Roman cosmos obeying Augustus' family laws religiously. In this sense, Horace's poem is a fitting summary of Augustus' deployment of musical imagery. For the first Roman emperor, the idea of musical harmony was a useful tool to convey the idea of political order he wanted to associate to his new regime. When we turn to Nero, we meet with political and musical traditions that in Roman sources are depicted as the opposite of Augustus. As opposed to the Augustan Golden Age, Nero's reign is portrayed by Roman historians as a dangerous and chaotic era, at least as disorderly as Nero's personality. Nero was also a great music enthusiast, and traditions about Nero as musician have teamed up with his image as a terrible and cruel emperor. You might know the anecdote about Nero singing while Rome was burning, a story echoed, among others, by Shakespeare, and that was exploited in the blockbuster Quo Vadis, itself inspired by a novel from the end of the 19th century. So, what is the reality behind this musical fiction? To begin with, there seems to have been some similarity between Augustus and Nero's use of the iconography of Apollo. Consider, for instance, coins like this one from the British Museum, which depicts Nero on one side and Apollo playing the kithara on the other. As suggested by Timothy Power, in this kind of objects, the fact that Nero appears on the obverse and Apollo on the reverse invites us to set the two figures in relation with one another, to link them with a result that is similar to that of the comparison between Aeneas and Apollo made by Virgil. Unlike Augustus, however, Nero appears to have taken the musical game a step further. Since he was always craving for attention and praise, our Roman historians tell us, he decided to perform as a professional kithara player. And for this reason, he started competing in Greek musical festivals. Let's recap briefly the highlights of Nero's career, keeping in mind that our literary sources were generally hostile to him. Now, Nero officially entered musical competitions for the first time in 64 CE in the nearby city of Naples, where, according to Suetonius and Tacitus, the theater was rocked by an earthquake immediately after the emperor's performance, talking about hostile historiography. After such a memorable, literally dramatical debut, the second most important event in Nero's musical career was his tour of Greece, on which Nero embarked in 66 CE, so that he could claim for himself the crowns from the most prestigious contests, like the Olympian and the Pythian Games. For the occasion, the emperor apparently even tampered with the calendar of the events and added musical competitions to games that had not previously included them, just so that he could claim to have won in all the major competitions. When Nero finally came back to Rome in 67 CE, he celebrated the success of his musical operation with an impressive unconventional triumph, obtained not over the enemies of Rome, but over his musical competitors. We owe the description of this extravagant event to the historian Cassius Dio, who records that during the triumph, Nero even paraded one of the Greek citharodes he had defeated, and this while riding on the chariot used by Augustus to celebrate his military victories. As is evident already by these few sources, Nero's take on music prompted some very negative reactions among Roman intellectuals. The problem of Nero's music seems to have been its public and professional character. For Nero, it wasn't enough to be just an amateur musician, like other emperors before and after him. He wanted to be a professional and to combine his powerful role with a career on stage. As suggested by Cassius Dio, moreover, Nero had replaced military victories and conquest with success in the theater. His efforts to establish himself as a musical star in the eyes of the intellectuals therefore hindered his political activity. From this perspective, the emperor's behavior was shameful and ridiculous, an attack against what is appropriate and by the most powerful Roman on earth. We could imagine that the reaction of people, common people, was actually different. They were crazy about games, they were crazy about spectacles and performances, and they must have appreciated Nero's musical attempts. But was it all just a display of narcissistic musicomania on Nero's part? Well, in fact, the argument can be made that politics too was at stake in Nero's musical tour. First of all, upon each success in the games, Nero proclaimed that his victory in Greek contests represented a crown for the Roman people. Nero's music could therefore be interpreted as an act of Roman appropriation of a central component of Greek culture, as a way to extend Roman control to Greek culture. On the other hand, after winning at the Greek Games and before returning to Rome, in 66, Nero celebrated his musical success by granting Greece freedom from taxation. We still have an inscription recording Nero's speech for his liberation of Greece, and in this document, Nero is called New Apollo, a definition that conflates the solar power of the god as benefactor of mankind and his role as patron of music. Nero's musical shows in Greece, therefore, gave him the opportunity to rethink and reshape Rome's relations with the Greek East. According to Susan Alcock, moving between cities like Corinth and Olympia, Nero's musical tour was even strategically designed to bring the spotlight back on mainland Greece, where Nero also started the works for a canal through the Isthmus of Corinth. The political significance of Nero's music is also confirmed by the reactions of Greeks. As far as we can see from other inscriptions, Nero's tour and consequent liberation of Greece was a successful operation and one well received among Greek communities. At the same time, we have evidence that Greek intellectuals, as ill-disposed to Nero as Roman intellectuals, were wary of the imperialistic, Romanizing aspect of Nero's music and reacted by criticizing and satirizing the singing emperor. However this may be, it is clear that in Greece, Nero was not just playing. Music was the soundtrack of the emperor's politics concerning the Greeks and represented a central cog in the negotiation of relations with the Greek East. In this sense, we can say that music was part of Nero's foreign policy, which, with all its quirkiness and extremes, anticipated the Philhellenism displayed by later and better regarded emperors like Hadrian. When it comes to contemporary politics, we are aware of the way in which music and power can go hand in hand. As suggested by the cases of Augustus and Nero, however, something similar was already happening in Rome. Music, therefore, provides us with a great perspective to explore the intersections between culture, politics, and power in antiquity. Thanks for watching. Here is a list of the references I have mentioned, and in case this talk has sparked your curiosity about Nero, a brand new exhibition now on at the British Museum may just be what you're looking for to try and piece back together the story of the real Nero, the story of the singing emperor.